Good afternoon. Angus, we'll take a couple of minutes for viewers to start coming in onto the stream. So we'll give them a couple of minutes, then we'll introduce you and give you a quick background on how long you've been an MP and things like that. If that's okay with you?
Right, yeah.
So we'll have our first viewer come in. It'll not be long until they start battering on Facebook. A minute, then we'll. Right, that's not bad. We're getting there. Good afternoon, folks. It's the two Davies Sunday show as usual, a wee bit later than usual. And today's special guest is Angus Brendan McNeil. He's the MP for the Outer Hebrides and has been since 2005, I believe, Angus.
That's correct, yeah. It's only about, I was elected when I was about 34, so that's only about 3 or 4 years ago.
I bet you're unhappy about the result last night, Angus?
Well, you know,
you beat.
Obviously, everybody supports their neighbour, so I'll be looking forward to speaking to the Tory MPs who will be desperately rooting for France in the semi-final. I'll be making sure that this neighbourly talk that I've been hearing for a while applies now to the French. It's going to be very interesting next week.
So, now, he's trained as a school teacher, Angus.
Actually, I was trained as a civil engineer to start with, and then there was a minor recession in the beginning of the 90s, and when recessions used to last something like 9 to 18 months, and then I worked for the BBC for a while, and then I in the Gaelic in Radio Nagale and Inverness, and then I went to do teacher training and got home to Barra to work in my early 30s. Ambition achieved. Back working in Barra, but you know, bad thing having ambitions because you don't want to achieve them ever. Ambitions. I plan to climb Everest or even Ben Nevis, but you know, it's always better as a plan, I think.
Aye. So, and of course, you won the long in Parliament when you came to prominence in the cash for peerage thing. You got the Met involved, did you know?
Yeah. Everybody was moaning about it, that there was something wrong with the law, so I went off to actually find the particular law. I got a researcher working at the time at Anne Harvey, still working the SNP, fantastic. And I said, any chance we could find this law? And didn't take long at all finding the law. And the law was just 3 paragraphs. Don't sell honours, it's bad. Don't buy honours, it's bad. And if you do, you can get up to 2 years in jail. So the funny thing is that we're looking at the law, and I spoke to an old guy who's late, he's dead, Chris Moncrief, and he asked me, what are you going to do? And I thought, he says, you go to the police with that? I said, yes. So therefore, I was a bit worried at the time, you know, if anybody in the party it was better to have a fait accompli, because sometimes you never know how people might say, play this way, play that way, play the next way. But before anybody could say anything, the decision was made, we're off to the police with it. And so myself and Anne Harvey got as much as we could together, a document, and then we went to see the police. Because once we'd said we were going, once I said I was going to see the police, that was the beginning of it, and we went to see it. And the police, everybody knows it's going on. I mean, you know, afterwards there were some. If you've got some of those guys in court, have been fascinating. Like how to put this as delicately as possible. I met some of the police officers later, long after the inquiry, and they told me that which I better not say which individuals, but they had more respect. They thought they would have respect for the system, but as I said, when they were lied to, they knew they were being lied to. That really, really annoyed them because they knew that they were being told fibs. So it's it's still murky, and I think the characters involved, you know, would want to leave it lie. Unfortunately, now it's subsequently, since the Conservatives have been selling since the coincidental exchange of £1 million and a peerage is still going on, the police unfortunately are not interested in it. So it'll go on.
What about Lord Lebedev of Siberia? What's your thoughts on him? He's actually got a dog called Boris. You know that, don't you?
I think he had maybe more than one lapdog called Boris. It's just part of the course. It's nothing should shock you anymore. I mean, every so often it'll come in, the press will be annoyed. Labour have promised to reform it if they're out of office. If they're in office, that'll be too difficult. That they'll have some sort of body looking at it until they're out of office, and then we're back in the same sort of circus again, you know.
That's why in my intros I call the House of Commons the House of Thieves and Carpetbaggers.
The House of Lords or the House of Commons?
Both, actually.
Okay.
One's the House of Thieves and the other one's the House of Carpetbaggers.
I'll give a beadier eye on them all then.
And what sort of response did you get when you and Martin Bell asked Tony Blair to stop chucking these duffers into the House of Lords?
That's right. You reminded me of that Martin Bell thing. I think, looking back, it's about 16 years ago now, which goes to show the glacial pace of Lords. From not a lot happened. I mean, I think they denied they were ever doing it, because by that stage they had to deny they were ever doing it. I do remember a Labour MP, saying to me, when she's asking about this, it was just broken, and she said, so did the SNP not send anybody to the Lords? I said, no. And she goes, how do you ever raise money then? I mean,
that says a lot, really.
End of story. It's just, but I mean, if that was happening in some Banana, don't think Banana Republics are that corrupt. It's the companies that were into them that corrupted them. But if this happened in some other far off land, people would just shake their heads and say, what do you expect? And it's happening in the UK, and they put some sort of veneer over it, and it's fine. It's not fine. It's far from fine, but it just keeps going. Because people don't mind corruption really like that in the UK. And that is the long and the short of it, from all levels, from the political level, the media level, and societal level. And they tolerate the corruption. And if they do, then it happens, and they don't think it's that corrupt because they tolerate it. It's a strange psychology going on.
It becomes normal, so people just ignore it.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
totally. And in other societies, we have to pay bribes to police or whatever. It's just normal, and people just think it's strange if you don't have to pay a bribe to police. I mean, I think we'd find it strange if... Sorry?
Hang on, chaps. Just to answer, I'm answering John Ward. We're getting comments put up all the time, Angus. So, Angus, how would Section 46 of the Edinburgh Agreement for a plebiscite election work? We'll get to that in a wee while, if you don't mind, John. Okay, so just let us run through this as it goes, and because a lot of people don't know what Angus is about. He's a bloody legend, man. 17 years in the House of Commons. Bloody hell, you wouldn't be able to live that long.
I'm surprised. You must have a gay, strong constitution to be able to sit amongst that corruption for so long, Angus, and not get bent yourself,
I mean, I'd say, in fairness to most who they are in it for the best of reasons, and on all parties. But there are a few that give it a particularly bad name, and that is definitely unfortunate. The worst of it is for us in Scotland is there are a few there, or there are many there, who just undermine the idea of Scotland being independent, while they accept Ireland being independent, or Denmark being independent, or the Baltics, or the Ukraine, or Greece, or Portugal, or wherever being independent, or Spain. They certainly don't accept Scotland being independent, or they try and belittle that prospect. So while Iceland can do it with the population of Dundee, Scotland can't. But that's a job for us to sort out. I mean, they said the same to Ireland, and they said the very same to Malta as well. And you look at the OECD figures at the moment in growth, and who's leading? Strangely enough, coincidentally, the last set of figures was Ireland and Malta. Who's at the bottom? The UK. So you kind of, that's a kind of the downside of a lot of the political interaction that we have.
Which brings us on a wee bit, Angus. Apart from your stunning start to politics, what's been your major achievement so far, if you don't mind me asking?
I suppose getting road equivalent tariff for the ferries in the islands, which made quite a big difference. We've now got ferries that are busier than ever, carrying more people and more cars, sailing in more routes. There's more ferries, but at cheaper prices, relatively speaking. So, of course, that's brought on its own problems. Demand does bring on its own problems, but it's a problem of success rather than a problem of failure. We just need more ferries, as you know. But probably the next thing we need to do is, rather than building ferries, is to look where we can build tunnels. Because certainly in the Faroe Islands, as I'm always saying, up to 10-kilometre stretches are being covered at less than £10 million a kilometre. And we're building harbours for 40 million, and another harbour for 40 million, and then a ferry for 50 million, another harbour for 40 million. So there's quite a lot of places where we could be pulling out ferries and maybe using sovereign wealth funds or pension funds, pardon me, as the ferryways do levering in other money with public money, and then of course the asset gets paid off by the users over a number of years. So I suppose yeah, the biggest achievement is probably that local achievement, really. But then I was asked one time at an election, what have you done? And I was thinking, what have I done? What? Anyway, after the election, it was after 2015 election, I flying into Stornoway, and I was looking out the window, and there was guys going around on motorcycles, the motorcycle test place there. Oh God, I forgot about that. That was one of the things I did in the last Parliament. They were about to move it out of Stornoway, and I knew Mike Penning, who is the Conservative Transport Minister, quite well. We were on the tug of war team together. We annoy each other and we get on with each other in similar measure. And I phoned him one day and I said, look, they're trying to take away our motorcycle test centre to go to Inverness. It's a long way away. It's a ferry ride from Stornoway. It's a bus drive then from Ullapool. And he said, is there a solution? I said, yeah, there's a solution. So he says, tell me what the solution is and we'll do our best. And we did. And he did his best, in fairness to Mike Penning, or Sir Mike Penning as he is now. And the thing was saved. And I'd forgotten all about it. Until after the election, I was flying back into Stornoway. And there it is down there. I could have done remember that about 3 months ago.
See, it's just to let our viewers get an idea of what it is you've done over the 17 years of hard slog it must be doing there. It's like, especially prime ministers, anybody have to sit through prime minister's questions. It's absolutely horrendous. It's like a Punch and Judy show. It's got worse over the last few years as well.
It has, yeah. I mean, I suppose Tony Blair was there, and then did David Cameron come in when he did, didn't he? And he told Tony Blair he was the future once. So then we'd Gordon Brown for a bit. I remember them telling me that my laugh put Gordon Brown off. Some Labour whip came up to tell me that my laugh was actually putting Gordon Brown off. Big mistake. I laughed louder the following week. And Gordon was trying to concentrate. So yeah, then there was Gordon, and then of course David Cameron came in, and things were going fine for David Cameron, relatively speaking. I mean, apart from the fact that the serious thing that probably between Alistair Darling's time and George Osborne's time, around that 2008, 2012, was they managed to plant the seeds of austerity. A lot of the stuff that's been felt badly in the UK today was probably set in train by the last Labour Chancellor Darling, and then in Cameron's time with George Osborne. Needless austerity, looking at debt to GDP when they should have been worrying about GDP rather than worrying about debt, because all they worried about was the debt side and trying to cut the debt. But they went from, I think they started with a debt to GDP of about 60% and ended up with one about 70%. So rather than trying to grow the economy, those guys cut away the potential of growth. I often thought of them as being like farmers who decided that spending money on seeds was an incredible waste, and that they should cut back at that particular stage, and then wonder why there was no harvest quite a while later. I think that's a lot of what's happened in the UK.
Great analogy. Yeah, great analogy.
We're seeing that again today. I mean,
totally.
It's a market economy, and everywhere you look, there's people taking money out the public's pockets. Public's no money you can't spend into the economy. The economy contracts or stagnates.
Yeah, and since Brexit, I think private sector investment has fallen quite a lot as well. So that's problematic. But in the Cameron years, Alex Salmond managed to talk him right into a referendum, which was an achievement in itself with 6 MPs when you think back. But of course, they won that with a tactic that made them think that they could do the same and kill the Brexit thing in their own party and play the same way. But of course, the media didn't play it the same. And anybody who thinks the media are pretty neutral or not that quite influential, it should look at the difference of their achievements between 2014 and 2016. Essentially, the UK government played the same card, but the media treated it very differently. Rather than trying to amplify it and scare people, as they did in 2014 and 2016, they took an opposite tack and sent it back at the government. And stuff like "we don't need experts" became very, very popular.
Yeah. Now, bringing you up to what's been happening over the past week, Angus, right? You're right in the middle of all this. When we're hearing one side say, well, that's Nicola's authority all gone now, right? Okay. And the other side's going, oh, Ian Blackford must have been pushed and all the rest of it. Can you tell us what the hell's blooming going on? From what you see, right? What do you think?
Very tricky one. I mean, I think the MPs have made a decision as to who they want to see leading them, and that has come to pass. Various people, obviously, I've read various bits of spin and contradictory bits of spin, but I think the best way of putting it is people have decided that they were looking for a change, and the change came. Now, the change was coming anyway, so it came, it's arrived, and we just have to look forward and move on and unite behind our leader, as is a common parlance in Westminster.
I read Pete Wishart's leaving letter, right? And I just thought, come on, for goodness sake, did you need to word it that way? You know what I mean? It was, he's still going to be there. You know, and come on, you're part of the SNP group. It doesn't matter if you're the front bench, second bench, third bench, fourth bench. You're still part of the SNP group, so therefore you're important. Yeah.
I mean, I think everybody, in a way, if you're not in government, and certainly if you're in the third party, we're all together as effective backbenchers, really. I mean, but, you know, I'm just seeing a comment that Stephen Flynn had a great start, and he had a fantastic start, standing up with no notes, no nothing. So, I mean, I think whatever, you know, when there's change, there's always a wee bit of rough water, if you like, when the tide changes, a bit of wind over tide. If, you know, the things aren't completely smooth, but I think they'll smooth out over time. I think, you know, if Stephen Flynn, and I'm sure he will have another few good Prime Minister's questions like that, which is really the main job of the group leader, the group spokesperson, is Prime Minister's questions, and to be seen to do well then. And I'm pretty sure, I'm very confident he will. I mean, the way he stood up with no notes, asked short questions, it was good. And of course, it'll be difficult for the other side as well as to how to treat Stephen Flynn. And that's an important thing going forward, thinking about referendums and what you have. It's not just what your side's got, it's what the other side's got. And, you know, I think from an idea, you can see that both Stephen Flynn and Ian Blackford have overlapped into pulling the Brexiteer parties together as one, Labour and Tory. And I think that's a theme that will continue. It's been a theme that's been talked about.
Right. Okay. Let's discuss the Prime Minister's questions now. I mean, you know, every week we watch Prime Minister's questions. It doesn't matter who the bloody Prime Minister is at the time, right? All we do is question gets asked from the leader of the SNP and body swerve. Now, what good does that do us at the end of the day, Angus?
Well, I suppose the answers are never of any use to you. What is of some use are the questions, and the questions you might want to ask, and the questions you might want to put in people's minds. And then to have a Prime Minister that's evasive. So you might want to ask about, you know, what does the Prime Minister recognise as independence? What does the Prime Minister recognise as democracy? Where does he recognise independence? Where does he recognise democracy? And remember, the world is watching sometimes, so you can't put the Prime Minister in the spot. We know what the Supreme Court has said, and the Supreme Court, I think, was fascinating in that it said we couldn't have a referendum because of, even though it would have no legal effects, it would have very strong democratic repercussions, forcing Westminster to act on something Westminster didn't initiate. So, you know, well, there's no immediate effect on the day. I think there's an effect on people's minds. And ultimately, when you live in a democracy, that's where you're chipping away at all the time. It does take people a while to change their minds. We can remember back maybe before 2014 particularly, but certainly around that time, people said, I voted Labour because everybody in my family voted Labour for years. And I think people have stopped that now. People look at ideas and look at where things are going. And that sort of, those sort of small events help shape where people are going. I think no longer do people inherit their politics, perhaps, as they once used to. So I do think there's a purpose to it, but there's not an immediately obvious purpose. And I suppose in the meantime, something's going to happen. We can't let the government have 5 years unchallenged, unquestioned, with no difficulty at all. I mean, I think even last week, the Prime Minister being asked about Baroness Mone was useful. Of when Boris Johnson was in power, being asked about the parties. You know, I remember Catherine West, Labour MP, asking about that. And, you know, she had another question that day, but something came up. I remember trying to speak to one of our colleagues to ask that question, because that question was just lying. It was hanging there. I know nobody was going for it. But one of our guys had a constituency question he wanted to ask anyway. And and Catherine West came and did that question, and it was one that came back to haunt Boris because it was quoted back at him. So you can set in markers, you can set in sort of landmines. We've that in the liaison committee as well. I remember asking Boris about, if there are queues at Dover and whatever, who'll be responsible? It wasn't for them, but you can use these questions as for landmines for the future. He'll give you assurances now, because that's a temptation that you will see in all political parties. It'll be fine now, and trust me, I know what I'm doing. And then years later, you find out they weren't knowing what they were doing at all.
Okay, I'm between Labour and Tory doing that road at the moment.
Say again, David.
Do you see much of a gap between the Labour Party and the Tory Party at the moment, and the Commons?
Only a gap of optimism and pessimism. That's all. On policies, basically, they're going to take the UK to the same place. Starmer says he wants a different sort of Brexit agreement, but any Brexit agreement you have that's requiring paperwork, that's a problem. The problem is the paperwork that the agreement has. And if you're outside the single market and the customs union, you're going to have a pile of paperwork. And that ain't going to change. I mean, I think it's becoming more and more apparent, except to the very diehards, that Brexit's a mess and Brexit's not good for them. They compare themselves to everywhere else, and the only one of the G7 not grown or what have you. And I think Scottish independence might be a help to them to shock them back into reality. So we might be able to do our neighbours a great favour there. Heaven knows they could do with some favours.
$64,000 question, as they say, is: do you think there will be any kind of a referendum at any time?
No. I mean, I think I've written about 5 letters to 4 prime ministers asking for Section 30 for the last 4 years, and no is the answer. And that's why we've got constantly amazed at SNP optimism that they must listen to this next mandate. No, they don't, and they've proven that they don't have to listen to a mandate. And what's interesting about the Supreme Court dovetails into this. What the UK government's very anxious to do is not give Scotland a referendum. Avoid the question being asked, because the answer is the problem, not the question. And the Supreme Court, in a way, has done the same thing. It has blocked off the question. Now, they've got their own legal reasons for doing that or whatever. But what they have said in their judgment, particularly in paragraph 74 to 81, is the answer is a problem. So you've got to prevent the answer arriving from the ballot box. Now, we can shout, we've got all the mandates we want. Clearly, it's done nothing since 2018, 2019, whenever, even further back. But we've got to get the question asked of the people. Now, this is what drove me towards Plan B. I could see full well for about 4 or 5 years there was going to be no referendum, for the very obvious reason. There was a great chance of Scotland winning this time after Brexit, just because of the promises that were made. Vote for the UK to guarantee your place in the EU. So we've got to create an event that gives an answer, and that event can only now be an election.
Yeah. Okay. So now then, you've been an advocate of what's called a plebiscite election for quite some time, and I do seem to remember at one of the SNP conferences you got quite torn apart for suggesting such a thing. And I remember writing a blog post on plebiscite freedom, and I got torn apart for that. And now we have a plebiscite is now the way that the SNP will be moving forward. So can you give us any insight into how things changed for you personally when that became the narrative, instead of tearing you apart to all of a sudden, let's use Angus's solution?
Yeah, okay, I'll try and do the best I can. About the 2018 SNP conference, I spoke to one of the most senior ministers at the time, not the most senior, but a very senior minister at the time in the Scottish government. I said, when are we asking for the Section 30? And he told me there's no point asking because we're not going to get it. I thought, what? So we just hang about here not asking because with self-fulfilling prophecy we're not going to get it. So within a month or two, I'd written to Theresa May at the time and asked for a Section 30 to get the no. So we move on to the next stage. And then by the 2019, my partner then was working in this area was Chris McElhenney, who's since departed the parish to the Alapa parish. And I could just see the way things were. They weren't selecting anything at SNP conference that would allow members to speak about this, or to debate, or to inform themselves, which I think was a mistake later when you later the lack of debate or engagement with this left the leader saying it's votes and left the deputy leader saying it's seats. You know, it's a primary one sort of error, but it shows a lack of even the first paragraph thinking going on here. So, you know, we weren't getting anywhere putting this into conferences here and there. There was even a tepid motion at conference, which Chris McElhenney spotted and said, we can amend this motion, but they pulled the blooming motion. It was only a motion said this SNP were great in government or something like that. So they pulled the motion. And McElhenney said he was going to go to Aberdeen and try and get this on the. I said, you are off your head. It's a waste of a journey. I'm not a waste of a journey. So I said, I'm not going up to Aberdeen to be wasting my time to get nowhere. You know, Aberdeen's a long way from me for me to, you know, here in the West. And Chris, to his credit, went to Aberdeen and got roundly booed by a whole pile of idiots at SNP conference. And I hope those guys are now utterly ashamed of their behaviour, because what you should have is at least respectfully listen and disagree. But everything was kiboshed. It was out of the way. And this went on for a number of quite a while. I mean, asking people in the party, very prominent people in the party, myself and Chris asked a number of occasions before the 21 election, if we could discuss the idea or if we could think of using the 21 election. And of course, there was the 2019 going to ask for a Section 30 as well before Christmas. And then there was an election before Christmas. And then something like the 12th or 13th of December. And then the demand for a Section 30 was put in after the election, after we'd lost some leverage. So, of course, that was a no. January 2020, going to take some weeks to consider what we're going to say came from the government. Nothing was done apart from laying down draft amendment and draft referendum bills was a stunt for a while at Holyrood. And even one was laid before a blooming election. At the end of I mean, if you're laying a draft bill, you don't do it a few weeks before the Parliament rises, because it's utterly going nowhere. So this carry on was going on. We couldn't debate, we couldn't discuss. We were mocked. I mean, we were mocked internally. I mean, I was one MP said to me, "Oh, Angus has always got a plan B. You've always got a plan B," in a sort of a mocking way. And you know, it's quite annoying, because it was becoming more and more apparent that we weren't going to have a referendum, and we were wasting a lot of time. And we did. We wasted a number of years. And you know, even early 2022, discussing with probably the most prominent person you could, the idea of using an election and being told it was an incredibly daft idea. And then to move forward, and the thing was announced that this was going to be a fallback now, which was at least progress. And then in the Supreme Court, to have confirmation of, if you like, what I suspected was going to happen at some stage, the Supreme Court was going to strike it down. The Supreme Court could have given us a worse decision, incidentally. The Supreme Court could have said to us, go away and legislate and come back to us, and wasted more time on us. But fortunately, the Supreme Court's judgment was actually quite useful. And you might argue it was better than just giving us a referendum, which is only a one hit, be agreed at some time. But they've said the ballot box has got authority, and they've left the door open for using elections. So that's the way forward now. I think everybody... I did see somebody in the Supreme Court, she will remain nameless, who had mocked Plan B, and we walked out after the thing, and I said to her that that's I said, well, we've got a Plan B. And she sort of sneered at me and said, well, we've got Angus Brendan McNeil around with us. And I said, you should have listened to me 3 or 4 years ago. Because I remembered being sneered at by her 3 or 4 years ago. So I haven't been magnanimous at all to some of those people. And I think, you know, the point is, I'm not saying I was maybe you're accidentally right or whatever. The point is not, I think the sneering is wrong. I think what you should do is engage and listen. And you should go forward with sort of a debate, and you should win by that, not by ganging up playground style, might is right, and not listening, going, na, this is what we want to believe, and not being ready for a fallback. And that's kind of what annoyed me. And I think going forward as well, we should be discussing properly to what options we might choose and what options we might rule out. And let's not wake up in 3 or 4 years' time thinking, we could have done that. Because I remember writing before the 2021 election that the 2026 election will be the 2021 election for slow learners. And it might well yet be that. And it's quite annoying, because you can have your personal sort of disagreements within a political party, but that has actually material effects for people. And the material effect it has for me is here in the Hebrides, we are going to see Scotland with the population dropping over the next 30 years. And the Hebrides probably more so than anywhere else. And this is happening. Scotland's population is going to drop And this is happening what we're reading about is Ireland's going to increase 20%, Iceland's going to increase 32%, Norway's going to increase 12%, as is Denmark. Even the tiny Faroe Islands in the middle of the sea between Scotland and Iceland is going to increase by 6%, having already increased by something like 12% in the last 15 years. And that means that people I'm related to, any grandchildren or whatever, the chances to live in the Hebrides where I'd want them to be living is diminished. So, you can have your political sort of disagreements with people, but it has material effects for my life and for my neighbours' lives and for my cousins' lives, and particularly has effect for us here in the islands. I mean, the health board here will tell us that they project difficulties of staffing for people going forward. We need quite a lot of people coming in. But one of the ways we can do this is we get proper political power, like those other places I mentioned, to make a difference, and we can change all that. So that's why wasting of 4 or 5 years is very significant. And that's why I'm getting more and more in a hurry as this progresses. And I think we should be looking at using a Holyrood election is where I'm going to go with that.
That was going to be my next question was, what would you prefer, Holyrood election or Westminster election? We've already discussed this, Angus, just to let you know, and we feel that because of the rise of the Labour figures, that it could be quite problematic for us. Labour have gone up to 31%, whereas we're talking about voting intentions in the Westminster election, whereas the SNP have got 41%. So, and it changed in just the last polling that we saw, but that was quite a shocker. That really was quite a shocker. And thinking that people of Scotland were going to go back to their usual thing of voting one way in a Westminster election and a different way in a Holyrood election.
I think that there's a lot in that, and I'll maybe take it in turn. I think it's been said by the First Minister there's no ifs, no buts going to be a referendum on the 19th of October 2023. Barring some sort of brain phase at Westminster and Downing Street, that there isn't going to be. But there's two ways to create a Scottish election. There's the Section 46 route, which is basically the standing orders. The First Minister resigns, and then there can be an election for somebody else's First Minister. If there's two candidates, the one with the highest votes will go through, and that's under Rule 7. And then under Rule 5, there's only one candidate. The Parliament can block it. But when you've got a majority, it doesn't matter what happens, Rule 5 or Rule 7. You could vote with no confidence just about immediately. So you've got that approach. You've also got the 2/3 approach, and the assumption has been made that the opposition might not want an election or don't want an election. Who knows? Who's been asking the opposition? I mean, the opposition are always complaining about the SNP government. They can easily, I would imagine, be goaded into sometime in the next year. You've got a complaint about something or other. You want to go to the people about it. You don't. So that then looks bad for them. So I think that there's a no loss approach in trying to goad the opposition. For a year, do you want an election? We want, but then and let them be seen as the guys who are blocking this, rather than us dismissing it straight away. I'm not dismissing it, but rather than the First Minister and the Scottish Government and the Scottish Parliament dismissing it. And then this leads on to our special conference. From what I'm hearing about the special conference is SNP members will not be discussing the variety of ways forward. They're going to be told that it's a Westminster election because it's the first one coming. Well, the first one coming could be one created at Holyrood. But, these things are mutually exclusive. The Supreme Court has opened the door for any ballot box event or any group of people to ask the Scottish people, do they want independence? And this is another thing that's very interesting. So, you could go a Holyrood plebiscite created for that before Westminster. You could also go to the Westminster election. That's got a problem with the franchise, as we know. It's not the most inclusive election, including with the people of Scotland voting. And it's also got a media problem as well. The leaders' debates ain't going to include the First Minister or the leader of the SNP or any prominent leaders, because Labour and the Tories are getting cute to that one now. So it won't include that. And so you're going to have leadership debates without them. And you're going to, anyway, even if you did manage one or two, you're going to have a massive media narrative that I think isn't going to be about the wants of 6% of the UK population who happen to be the majority in Scotland wanting Scottish independence. It's going to be about the 94% are talking about, and that's going to be English matters. So that's got a huge problem, the Westminster election. And then how do you win it? Do you win it in seats or do you win it in votes? And what do you do afterwards? How do you get international recognition amongst that mess of a plebiscite event. Not impossible, but not as clean as holding a one question, a collapsed Holyrood, either by the opposition agreeing that they want to get rid of the SNP and kill this forever, and the SNP and the Greens deciding that this is going to be an issue on independence. So you can make that into a de facto referendum quite quickly if you go them into voting for it. And I'm sure they would actually, given a chance, and they knew the SNP were going to vote for it. So you might not need the First Minister to resign, but at least let's explore this. Anyway, let's say you do 1 and 2, or you do 2. What about if you feel at Westminster something that's not been answered or nobody's raised the question? Would you then go again at the Holyrood election afterwards and ask the same question? Well, I would say you would, and that the feeling would be that the Westminster franchise was so bad and so wrong, and the campaign was missed by the media, that it would need to be on a cleaner Holyrood election where the issue was the prominent issue of the election. Certainly, Scottish independence will not be the prominent issue of a Westminster election. It'll be changing red for green. It'll be changing Brexit for Brexit.
Do you feel that the mainstream media would in Westminster election try to play down any form of plebiscite election at that time?
I think a Westminster election, I don't think they would do it deliberately. There'd just be so much else going on. I mean, you've got to think of the concerns of Cornwall, you've got to think of the concerns of Yorkshire, the concerns of Wales, the concerns of Kent, the concerns all over England. There are what, 55 million people there, or whatever, 55 million people there with justifiable issues and concerns that'll come to prominence. I mean, a bad NHS couple of winters, the way the Tories are going, that may be a massive issue that what the election will be about. We want an election earlier so we can sort out NHS before we get to that state. That's why I don't want to waste 2 more years of Tory austerity sitting back doing nothing with people just,
suffering.
Suffering, exactly. And that's what we're going to condemn them to, by not at least approaching or trying to have an election in 2023 that is on the question of independence. The one question of independence, and let them decide. And surely, I'm reminded of a guy who was. Of course, there's an element of risk in this. Well, one of the good things, firstly, somebody said to me on Twitter yesterday that I wanted a Holyrood election because I didn't want to risk my own job at Westminster. Well, if you have a successful Holyrood election, that's Westminster over, so we can bury that one. But I'm reminded of a guy here in the island who used to be he was a lifeboat coxswain. He's now dead, and the doctor was telling me about him one time risking the boat on the rocks trying to rescue people. And he looked after that lifeboat really well. And he was also a coxswain mechanic, and he looked after the lifeboat really well. But when it came to the purpose of the lifeboat, he knew what he was. The life was the big part in that lifeboat. And similarly with us in politics, the purpose of our political party and our political being is to save Scotland and get Scotland moving forward. So Scotland is in the same sort of league as your Icelands and your Irelands and your Denmarks, your Norways and your Finlands and everybody else, and not the tail end Charlie of some failing G7 country.
Yeah, I've heard you're talking about the suffering of Scotland. I've heard a wee whisper today that that's the Scottish NHS budget going to be reduced in the coming week. And look, Angus, I don't want to put you on the spot here, but these things are going to happen. We're getting to the point where the money is getting tight. We cannot manufacture money the way the Westminster government can.
Absolutely, and I think that's why we need our own currency. There's 180 currencies in the world, and anybody there's a minor piece of reading on this. If you read Richard Murphy, The Joy of Tax, or Stephanie Kelton, I've just forgotten Stephanie Kelton, her book, The Deficit Myth, I think it is, or a number of other books, and you just get very readable books. You get an understanding as to how important it is to have your own currency. But I think the other point...
Professor Murphy done a wonderful series of YouTube videos based on this book, actually.
He did,
yeah. I actually watched programs where I'm breaking it all down for you, but more or less chapter by chapter.
Yeah, and it's very digestible stuff. The point was going to make is some people have got this idea of a crisis at the moment. So in the past, we couldn't do anything because Brexit was on the go. We had to get the Brexit thing had to level out. Then, of course, there was a pandemic on the go, so you couldn't do anything because there was a pandemic. And then the Ukraine war had started, and then we couldn't do anything because the Ukraine war had started. And now that's going to go on. And now people are saying, incredibly that we can't do anything because there's a cost of living crisis. Well, that's a reason for doing something. I mean, there's strikes all over the UK. I phoned my mother's from Ireland. I phoned my old aunt last night. She's about 92 or something like that. I asked her how many strikes there were in Ireland, and I've got to caveat this. It's from a 92-year-old aunt, but she says not hearing anything about postal strikes or railway strikes in Ireland. She said, or nursing strikes. I said, well, that's all the chat on the news in the UK. She goes, oh, I know that. But she was unaware of strikes in Ireland. So maybe somebody will know. But the point about that is Ireland, if Ireland was still in the UK, Ireland would be suffering the way we are at the moment. That's why we've got to get out. The cost of living crisis is the reason for doing something. It's not the reason for not doing anything. It's a reason for collapsing Holyrood. It's a reason for giving the people a choice for something different. It's not a reason for sitting your hands and saying and creating the self-fulfilling prophecy that we can't have an election referendum now because of all these things. That's wrong. The reason we have to do it is because of those things. And that is why Ireland's not suffering the way we are at the moment on those particular issues.
Very good.
Funny, Stephen Shelton's put a wee comment up. You know, we're not supposed to do any of these things because of pandemics. We're not supposed to do any of these things because and cost of living crisis and things like that. But when you think about it, the UK government continued with Brexit negotiations in the middle of a pandemic.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, they can do everything. Yeah, absolutely. Good point. There was nothing that the UK government couldn't do through all those things and visit upon us. You know, and I think Peter Duggan has seen the comments has put in a good point that we're sitting back and watching Ireland flourish. Yeah, we are. And we're watching other countries flourish as well. And I think when you strip out, you know, you hear this stuff, oh, the Barnett formula gives you that and the rest of it, thrown at us by our opponents. The thing that tells me success or failure is that people coming here. And if Ireland's population is going to increase 20% and Iceland's 30% the next 30 years and Scotland's going down 2%, and the Hebrides is going to be the worst affected of it all, then there's something very wrong. You can say all you want with your monetary stats and identifiable and non-identifiable spending, but it doesn't mean diddly squat when your populations are going down. And that is why Ireland is flourishing, as Peter Duggan said.
Now, what do you make of Gordon Brown's latest wheeze?
I just want to answer a question. I'll come back to Gordon Brown, but if Nicola Sturgeon quits, what stopped the Tories coming in and just taking over? Well, they can't, because the majority in the Parliament is such that they can't. And they wouldn't be able to run it very well. That's why we should try to go them into election. That's why you'd use a vote of no confidence. That's also why you should get a legal opinion on all this as well. The party get a legal opinion and have that clear. So we don't ask those questions. I'm quite confident where those things will go. But let's have legal opinions on this and make sure that everybody's in the picture rather than one person frightening another. Let's just get this all out in the open. And we have the pros and cons of this so we can make a decision on it collectively. Not just one person deciding for everybody.
Angus, are you talking about approaching the Supreme Court again?
No. I mean, I think it was useful to go to the Supreme Court. I mean, I think the criticism of the Supreme Court I'd have too is they should have been done a long time ago, and I mean years ago, if it was going to be done like that. And the second thing is maybe you should have legislated beforehand and let somebody else take it to the Supreme Court, because I think the people would have been even more annoyed that they thought they were about to have something. It's a psychological thing. I was reading of psychology. If you're about to eat a marshmallow and somebody pulls it out of your hand, you're so annoyed. So you're about to have a referendum and the Supreme Court takes that referendum away from you. You're supremely annoyed. And that would have had another few percentage points. I think the Supreme Court in itself was useful for independence, but it could have been even more useful for independence. And rather than lose at the Supreme Court, as they said, we would have won in the Parliament and lost in the Supreme Court. We'll let the people decide at an election. But we could have done this a good while ago. We shouldn't have been going around arguing for a second Brexit referendum as we did for quite a long time.
Yeah, well, there's a chap that we follow, or we have followed in the past, which is a chap called Professor Mark Weller from Cambridge. He was the constitutional expert for the United Nations. And he came out with a rather startling statement that said that Scotland could run a fully legal referendum under United Nations rules, be fully recognised by all the other nations of the world, and does not require Section 30 order from Westminster. Right now, okay, look, that's an opinion of a constitutional expert, even as high as he was, being part of the UN. How do you feel about that? Do you feel we should just be pushing that aside and going, no, that's a route we shouldn't travel? Or do you think we should maybe get Nicola Sturgeon or yourself to approach the United Nations and ask the question, look, guys, can we do this? You know, and see if we get an answer back. What do you feel, Angus?
I missed the very first part of that because I was looking at Peter Duggan's question, which I made a note of.
The first part of it was Professor Mark Weller. He's a constitutional expert for the United Nations, or he was, and he brought out a statement that said we can run a fully legal referendum using UN law, and it would be fully recognised internationally, and we don't require a Section 30 order. Now, okay, it does beg the movement in the SNP. It requires someone like yourself or Nicola Sturgeon to approach the United Nations and say, all right, guys, can we do this? What's your feeling?
I'm not absolutely certain about that, because I'll tell you the problem you'd have there. I mean, I'm not in any way questioning what he's done, but the problem you have there is getting people to man the ballot boxes, the polling stations, somebody else to count them. Now, which law would set that up? I mean, we know the Scottish Parliament can't legally do it, and Westminster ain't going to do it, and councils ain't going to cooperate to that level to do it. So I can't see the only ones that you're left with really, and we've had the referendum route blocked. The only time the ballot boxes will come out to ask a question about this is going to be at either a Holyrood or a Westminster election. And then I think the debate is about which election. And, all we need to do is have the people to speak on a question, to answer a question at the ballot boxes. And we then have the authority, as the Supreme Court said, I think it was in paragraph 74, if I've got the stuff somewhere. It was a cracker of a quote from them. They said it would have authority, and it would have legal and practical effects. I think it was maybe paragraph 81 that they said that it would possess the authority, and it would, when you have authority from the people, that's what we've got to get to somehow. And I think the only three that I can see that are obvious at the moment are coming anyway is a Westminster election, a Holyrood election, or we create a Holyrood election before then. And I did notice that it was Peter Duggan again asked the question: Could the opposition have FMs for one day for 28 days? That's a good question. Practically, maybe they could. Maybe they could if we don't go the 2/3 route, if that's unsuccessful. But the bigger issue then becomes for them a political issue. It'd be one of denying democracy. It'd be one of playing games with the people going forward. It'd be one of annoying the people even more. That marshmallow they thought they were going to get, psychologically, the people might be very fed up with them and might drive people towards independence even more. So activity can create possibilities going forward. That's using the Section 46, using the 2/3 majority. It's an easier one. Just goad the opposition into being annoyed with something about the SNP. Let's go to the people about it. And you can easily get an election, probably any week, at First Minister's questions.
It wouldn't be that hard to go to opposition anyway. They're pure idiots. I mean, given the place Sarwar actually believes he's popular, and God knows what that idiot Ross thinks of himself.
Yeah, but given that they're, given that we've said this now on this broadcast, they're going to know where you're at. But at the same time, they have to make a choice. If the First Minister, an opposition party, has been saying that the government is so bad, and the government then offers them an election to go to the people about on their wish, we'll go on our wish, but you go on your wish, and we'll see what the people vote for. So I mean, it's a sort of a zero loss to taking that particular route. But if we're not even going to try, then.
What did you make of Gordon? I want to get back to this.
Gordon Brown stuff. Sorry, I got you on a tangent. That's Peter Duggan again. Thanks for that, Peter.
Constitutional reform.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, as somebody pointed out very quickly, there's even less than the vow we promised in 2014. And we're meant to have the most powerful, devolved, whatever. Even, Gordon Brown and co were very lucky with the Scottish media in the past when Gordon Brown only had to sneeze, and the media would say, is this an important sneezing intervention by Gordon Brown in the constitutional debate in Scotland, with sort of serious furrowed brows. Nobody's listening to Gordon Brown now. He's not even yesterday's man. He's years ago's man. And you know, it's not where people are at necessarily, not where the young people are at, and I think it's not what the majority of under 65s in Scotland are at. You know, people know that independent countries around us are successful, and they know that Scotland is like those countries, and that if Scotland was in that situation, it would be better for their families, for their neighbours, for their communities. And that is what's pushing people on. And there's no amount of flannel going to come from Westminster that's going to overtake that experienced and lived reality that people have. And people know they just got to Google stuff. I mean, Google what's happening in Ireland. Google what's happening in Norway. Google the options. I'll tell you what, there's another option for people. Google where in the world is it easiest to get rich? And you'll find out that it's a socialist paradises, if you like, of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark. They have more millionaires than billionaires per capita because of strong trade union rules, free education, and a good social security network, or net, I should say. So, where in the world is it easiest to become rich? I think it's up to people here too.
There's also a TED Talk. I think it's a TED Talk that you're referring to.
It is 15-minute TED Talk. Yeah, it is. That's right. Yeah, it's really, I can't remember the name of the guy. He's quite funny as well, but he's got some serious messages about equality, about social justice, and he sort of has he's a wee dig at Bernie Sanders to say these socialist paradises have more millionaires than billionaires per capita, and there's a reason why they have people who are wealthy and people who are doing very well, and it's a fascinating watch, and if they can do it, we can do it.
Of course, yeah. Well, anything else you can think to ask Angus? My goodness me, he's here. Let's ask him questions.
Bruni, I think Stephen McNeil, a good name, Stephen. Bruni will only boost support for independence. Absolutely. I suppose we should be welcoming Gordon Brown's utterances. Not so much with the furrowed, serious brow of the past, with a big smile in the present.
No doubt you see the stuff that's going around every time he pops his head out on social media. Every time he puts his head above the parapet, and people ask what cryptid pulled him out, he dusted him down.
Peter's coming on another point again. Should we concentrate and convince the undecided? Yeah, always. But Peter, I've heard that for 4 years now, and I think the undecided are there, and nothing will convince people more than the campaign, what everybody round about them is engaged. And I think the campaign in 2014 was the one that put on 17%. And if we never had the 14 campaign, we'd be still sitting here with independence, about a quarter of the Scottish population. Now it's over half. So, you know, that whatever stroke that Alex Salmond managed with his majority when he had one in the Scottish Parliament, and with 6 MPs at Westminster, you know, that was really what got so many people into and supporting and waking up to independence. And I know that young people around me, you know, cousins and other people in the island here who were paying probably not an awful lot of attention to constitutional politics, maybe day-to-day politics, took a step back and thought about it, and thought about Scotland's place, and then were aware of the news that we're watching, and he really tells us about what's happening in the UK and America, and Scotland's place versus the UK. And when you put Scotland's place relative to a number of other countries, it ain't so good, and it could be an awful lot better. And I think that's what the change was, having the campaign. So if Peter will accept that as an answer, I don't know. I'm sure he'll come back. But your chat's interesting as well here on the chat bar, guys.
Here's a awkward question for you, right? You know, obviously we sit and we look at what goes on in the Commons each week, right? And we look at you guys and we think, you know, they went in with the best of intentions to actually settle up and all the rest of it, right? But what's coming out from a lot of people is that, well, they've settled in. They're enjoying the big wage, and you know, how are they going to feel if all of a sudden we go right, fine guys, it's time to come back to Scotland. We're doing it, right? How are you going to feel about that, Angus? From a personal point of view, you know, you obviously have a nice lifestyle. I know that people tend to live up to their income and all the rest of it, right? However, you've got a certain build of a lifestyle, and all that's going to be broken. How are you going to feel about that?
Well, I think the lifestyle of, quite honestly, 4 flights a week to London, it's not something that bothers me going. And I think, given what I'm trying to do with the Holyrood election earlier, I mean, that very thing that people do, yeah, you're right, I do see it in social media, that settling down stuff, that would end, that would be over in about 18 months. So, if you want to get the MPs out of Westminster, get the Holyrood election going fast, and that's the end of it for us. I mean, the point about that is, yeah, it'll probably have a sort of short-term effect on people, but what it's going to do is going to bring Scotland up, going to bring people around about me up. So it shouldn't be about what a few MPs are perceiving, may or may not be perceiving, but it's about for the good of Scotland. It's going to be the good of the next generation, the generation after. And for me in the Hebrides, about getting our population up as well, and not having Scotland's population falling as it's projected to do under the current circumstances for the next 30 years. So we need all that to kind of change. And that really is what has to push us on. So that's why I'm pushing on with this. So I'm trying to make the argument for this. From what I understand at special conference, I don't think these arguments will be possible to make, unfortunately.
We'll be standing right beside you, Angus, because we intend to make the same argument as you're making.
Well, I think it's up to the membership, quite frankly, to be heard. Sorry, David Milligan. It's up to the membership to be heard on this, and for the membership not to accept sort of an instruction-giving session, but generally, nobody has got a monopoly in wisdom here. There's no one person that gets it all right, as we can see in the past. There have been missteps being made, and let's not make more missteps. The obvious misstep is disregarding Plan B till you had to regard it. And why wait so long? Why stubbornly wait and not go, well, let me hear what you've got to say. Let me think about this, and let me deal with it.
Can I ask you a question before?
Yeah, of course.
After the special conference that David and I and yourself will probably attend, would you mind coming back on and we can have a chat about it?
Fine, okay. Let's see where that one takes us. I saw a question there about borders, and this guy was calling it Skexit and Brexit. I mean, the problem with borders, and it's a problem the UK has got with everybody. The UK is going to have a border with everybody, much to its own detriment. Scotland would only have a border with one country, as Ireland does, but the UK has got borders with absolutely everybody, or England or Greater England, whatever it would be, then would have borders with, as it borders every country in the world. They can't send a prawn sandwich anywhere without a piece of paper of about the same weight, or pieces of paper of the same weight. The thing is they're not even putting up their own checks coming into England. You've got, under WTO rules, treat everybody the same. So you wouldn't have checks going south. You'd have set checks coming north on that border. I think what's in Jacob Rees-Mogg call it an act of self-harm if they were to check coming into the England, UK. Hopefully, what Scottish independence will do will be enough to shock them all into stopping their nonsense. But Ireland's got the same deal with the UK. But luckily, Ireland's got a number of other partners as well. And it's diversified, and Scotland itself will diversify after independence. So Ireland's become less reliant on its big neighbour, as Scotland will too. But remember, Canada has also got a big neighbour that it has a border with that is not exactly frictionless. But Canadians wouldn't give up their independence for that border issue. They see greater benefits for an independent Canada rather than being a part of the United States.
We've seen the diversion after the Velvet divorce, Slovakia and the Czech Republic. They used to be each other's biggest trading partners. Now they're biggest trading partners of the EU. But I'm going to have to wind this one up, Angus, because I go to work in exactly 60 seconds, just as well I only work across the road. And that's our hour up. It's been absolutely fantastic to get a chance to speak to you, Angus. Viewing figures have been a record for our show live, 291 people watching live. So that's quite a fair audience. That's a fair size. It's a size
Be careful, because after the fact, one of our third largest audience is in London. So be careful as you're walking the street down there.
Can I just say to Nathan McAllister, I have asked, and Nathan, the discussion didn't go well, but You know, it's not just me, there are a whole membership out there that might want to ask questions, and use the special conference for you. Don't use this, don't let MPs and MSPs railroad the membership. The members should be telling MPs and MSPs what they want, and nobody's got a monopoly in wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, Angus, I want to thank you, as I say, for coming on today. We've got a wonderful live audience watching, and thanks, guys in the audience, for your questions. But I really have to go because I start work in 55 seconds.
Angus,
You have a minute job, Davy.
No, I work. I'm a driver. I work across the road in the depot. Couple of hours a night. No.
Well, guys, as promised, you saw him here, Angus Bryn McNeil, the man, the legend, and he literally is that, right? So I do hope you'll come with us again. All right, right. Bye.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Bye, Davey. Bye, Angus.
Bye.
Bye.